And we have a liftoff. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our BGLiD webinar. I hope you're all doing well today. For those that haven't met me before, my name is Warren Rendon, and I'm the General Manager of CAS 360 BGLiD and UK. If you can't hear me or you have any issues with audio, please let me know through the chat. Probably can't hear me if you are having issues. If you do have questions throughout the session today, please type them into the Q&A. We will be reviewing the Q&A. We've got Andy from the CAS team, Andy, CAS 360 Product Manager. He'll be answering the questions in the chat that I can't. But if you do have any questions throughout the session today, please type them in there and we will do our very best to answer every question. So welcome aboard, everyone. So what I'm going to cover off today is obviously BGLiD and the new AML and CTF obligations that are coming soon in Australia. Before I get into that, I just want to do a bit of housekeeping and talk a little bit about BGL RegTech 25, which is coming around Australia in August. So hopefully coming to a city close to you, starting in Brisbane on the 5th of August and finishing up on the 21st of August in Melbourne. Get your tickets, it's free. And you'll have a great day. Having a look at a whole heap of things, and we've got some great speakers lined up as well. So please encourage you to come along to those sessions. In terms of BGL's product suite, here are our products. So obviously CAS 360, Simple Fund 360, Simple Invest 360, and Smart Docs 360. Hopefully you are using some, if not all, of these products. So if you are, thank you. And hopefully we can add BGLiD to that list. But what I'm going to cover today, and I'm going to start with, is the overview of the new requirements that are coming in as of the 1st of July 2026 as part of the AML and CTF Act. I'll talk a little bit about how BGLiD can help. I'll then go through a bit of an overview of what BGLiD is and what BGLiD does, little demo, some prices, and then hopefully get to a number of the questions which are already coming through. So let's start with what's new and what's, I suppose, part of the new proposed laws that are looking to come in next year. So I'll answer the obligatory questions first. Yes, there is a recording of this session. This session is being recorded. You will be able to watch the replay very soon. We'll be uploading this to YouTube and you'll be able to watch it. But everyone that's registered, even those that haven't come along, I think we've got something like 900 in the session today. The whole session is recorded. You'll actually get the slides as well because there's some important links in there. But that's obviously a very standard question that we get. Okay, so I'll go from again. So from the 1st of July 2026, the AML Act, so the Anti-Money Laundering and Counter-Terrorism Financing obligations will start applying to more entities across Australia. So these are current legal obligations that are essentially faced by banks and things like that are being sort of spread across more industries. So here is a list of the new industries as part of what they're calling tranche 2 of the legislation. So this includes obviously real estate professionals, dealers in professional stones and metals, lawyers, conveyancers, and for us, accountants and trust and company service providers. So what it effectively is that a broadening of the AML Act to capture more industries. So the first question is, are you going to be regulated? Obviously, it says accountants in the Act. However, there are certain services that you would provide that obviously would attract being a entity that needs to be regulated. Now, there is a whole list, but these are the 4 dot points that I think will apply to most, if not all, accounting firms and company secretary providers. Someone's asking, are bookkeepers included? Look, it depends on the services. So let me go through the services that are being provided. Because if you are appointing a person or acting as a director or secretary of a company for a legal arrangement or a body corporate. So that's point 1. So are you essentially appointing directors to companies? Point 2 is, are you appointing or acting as a nominee shareholder for an entity. So again, most accountants that are doing appointments of shares. The third one here, providing a registered office or a principal place of business. So again, a lot of accounting practices will use their address as the registered office address. And then the fourth dot point is to create or restructure a legal arrangement. So essentially establishments of companies and trusts. So if your firm is doing these, and if your business, if you're a sole practitioner, is doing any of these, then it is likely that you are captured. As I said, there is a much broader list across many industries, but these are the ones that, or the 4 dot points that I thought would apply to most accounting practices and even some bookkeepers. But if you're not doing any of these and you want to know if you are, certainly check out the AUSTRAC website. It's got a bit more information than what I can provide on the slide. So I'm going to move forward and say we are doing one of those. Okay. Yeah, I'll say someone's just asking a question. Can we elaborate on the last points as accountants use providers to set up in trusts? I'm not the legal expert, so there will be a clarification, okay, of those sorts of things. And I would just refer you again to the AUSTRAC website if there is sort of a determining factor on whether or not you would be captured or not. It's certainly part of their guidance, and as I get into a little bit later, there's more guidance coming out. All the official rules have not been released, and there's going to be more rules coming. So yeah, I'm trying to highlight what's been released publicly, but there is a lot more that's coming out as well. So I'm going to now move and let's make the assumption that we are going to be captured. Okay, so we are going to be captured as part of the requirements. So let's have a look at what we need to do as part of those requirements. So there's 5 steps. The first step here is to enroll and register with AUSTRAC. So I don't know if many of you have done any business with AUSTRAC. I suppose it's something you don't want to do too much business with because it's obviously an organization that's tracking crime. But essentially, these accounting firms, legal firms are going to need to register themselves with AUSTRAC and become a registered entity with AUSTRAC. So adding another regulator that you may not be dealing with today. So the first step is to enroll and register. And I'll elaborate on these slides a little bit more next. Then required to develop and maintain an AML CTF program, okay, tailored to your business. The third one is to conduct customer due diligence. And this is where we get into the whole area of ID verification, PEP screening, sanction screening, and things like that. Then there is the important part, which is the reporting of certain transactions and suspicious activity. And this is where the legislation really comes in, where there is a requirement for these professions to report certain transactions and what would be deemed suspicious activity. And it's really the essence of the legislation is reporting these transactions. And then obviously to make and keep proper records. So I will explain all of these dot points in a little bit more detail. But I'll ask you a question. Does it sound fun? Of course it does. Here we go. Let's have a look at what we need to do and break this up. So step 1 is to enroll and register with AUSTRAC. Now, I don't believe you can register right now today. That's coming, so it's not open for registration today. But enrollment involves providing information about your business, okay, its structure, key personnel, contact details. Okay, so there is a bit of information. Again, this will be defined, but you do need to enroll, and it's not just a simple, this is our name. There's some information that needs to be provided, in particular around key personnel. Okay. You also must keep these details up to date. So if there is a change in key personnel, a change in structure, this needs to be re-reported to AUSTRAC. There we go. You must enroll with AUSTRAC within 28 days of providing a regulated service. That will all be covered because whilst I have said that the enrolment isn't open yet, we are anticipating, I say anticipating, that enrolment will be open from March next year. Okay, but again, we'll wait for more information there, but we are anticipating it will be open from March next year. And then you will need to enroll before providing one of these services from July next year. So July is the cutoff. You actually have 28 days after. So in a sense, the very last day to enroll would be the 29th of July if you are providing one of these services on the 1st of July. Anyway, the best advice I can give is get this out of the way early and register as soon as you can. Second is then to develop and maintain an AML and CTF program. So AML stands for anti-money laundering, CTF stands for counter-terrorism financing. So the AML CTF program must contain what they're calling a risk assessment process. So to identify and assess the risks of this sort of financing in your business or in your client's business in providing these services. And then on top of that, there is some policies. So develop and maintain policies, processes, systems, and controls that manage and mitigate these risks. Okay, so there's two types of essential policies and processes that need to be set up as part of this. Okay, this document then must be approved by senior management of the firm. Okay, it also currently looks like it's going to need to be independently evaluated once every 3 years. That may change, but there is going to be an element of it being independently evaluated. One of the things that we've noticed a bit more since these sorts of laws came into New Zealand is the whole advent of a whole AML auditor, essentially people creating businesses that run AML audits on captured organizations. So if you're looking for a new business idea, there's one. And the firm or practice must also appoint an AML compliance officer. Okay, so this is a really important thing, that there must be an AML compliance officer within the firm. Now, if you are a sole practitioner, obviously you can create and make yourself the AML compliance officer, but there does need to be a AML compliance officer per firm. Okay, so just to make that clear, that is a requirement. Okay, there's a couple of questions here, but they're probably deep in the weeds. It's probably best that I get through a lot more of the content before I dive into some of those questions. Step 3 is conducting customer due diligence. So this is obviously CDD. So this is where we go through the process of actually checking the individuals that we are doing business with, and essentially some of the businesses as well. So as part of those policies and processes, it sets up a way that we now need to go forward and assess the customers that we are adding. So I'll talk a little bit about this here. So the first thing is we need to have what we call an initial CDD. This is establishing information about a customer on reasonable grounds before providing them with a service. You must basically verify that they are who they say they are. Okay, so who they claim to be, and I've put in brackets here ID verification, because we would need to essentially have a way of verifying they are who they say they are. And obviously ID verification is one of the ways that we could do that. We then need to do what's called effectively an AML screen on these people. So are they subject to targeted financial sanctions? Are they politically exposed? Or are they a relative or a close associate of a politically exposed person? So we need to ID verify, make sure they are who they say they are, and then we need to do essentially some sanctions and PEP screening on these particular individuals. So that's for initial customers. There is obviously an ongoing requirement here. Okay, so you are obviously required to monitor and manage the risks going forward throughout the customer relationship. And this is really around monitoring transactions for suspicious activity. Okay, so is there suspicious activity that the client is doing? Also updating risk profiles in response to various triggers. So does that person become a politically exposed person? Are they just a normal client and all of a sudden they become politically exposed? So there's different triggers there. And then obviously reviewing, updating, and re-verifying information as needed. This is something that obviously we hope to get a little bit more clarification on. I know in other regions that we operate, sometimes this may include, if there's a new passport issued, we need to verify the new passport. We are still sort of waiting for a bit more specifics on this, but there is going to be an element of reviewing and updating and re-verifying. We're just waiting on clarification. The next slide is the really important one, and this is regarding pre-commencement customers. So if you have a customer as of the 30th of June 2026, so one day before, You are not required to perform initial CDD or ongoing CDD. This is the current interpretation, at least. As I said, more information will come out, but currently this is what is on the AUSTRAC website. You are not required to do that. You are required to file, however, a suspicious matter report in relation to the customer if you feel that there's a requirement there, and if there is a significant change in the nature or the purpose of the business relationship. So effectively, you wouldn't need to bring those on board. It might be good to do it, but you wouldn't need to. They would be considered pre-commencement customers, right? Again, this is the current interpretation, and hopefully it stays that way, but AUSTRAC will determine over the next few months, I guess. And then we get into the reporting. So we've got now, obviously, we've registered or enrolled in the program as we have to. We've built the policies and we've set up our frameworks around our particular onboarding of customers. And now it's around reporting of certain transactions and suspicious activity. Again, the suspicious activity is open to interpretation. There, again, AUSTRAC will provide a little bit more information about what they would deem suspicious. But effectively, when there is something suspicious or when you suspect reasonable grounds that a person is not who they claim to be, or a matter is linked to criminal activity or proceeds of crime, that is where a suspicious matter report would need to be lodged with AUSTRAC. Okay, so that's effectively a suspicious matter. So the current sort of, and as I said, there'll be more detail added, but the current interpretation is the matter linked to criminal activity or proceeds of crime, or is the person not who they claim to be? Because that would also be suspicious if the person is claiming to be someone else. So there's sort of a couple of examples, I guess, but there will be more specific examples coming out. And then there's a few things around thresholds and transactional thresholds that are a little bit more specific. So an individual who is making a physical currency transaction valued at more than 10,000 Australian dollars. So physical cash transactions. There has been in the past newspaper reports of people buying houses. Yes, houses for hundreds of thousands of dollars with cash. And previously that does not require or wouldn't have required a particular report to be lodged, but this legislation would effectively bring that in. But again, you're going to have some more guidance on this around what is deemed, not what doesn't trigger or what does trigger. The next one is obviously around international transfers. Okay, so is there, if you're dealing with a multinational client, is there suspicious international transfers or international transfers going on? And then cross-border movements, so around physical cash being brought in and out of Australia as well. So there's some things there that are around those particular movements of money. And then the final one, which is the annual compliance report. So submitting an annual report summarizing how you've met your AML and CTF obligations with AUSTRAC each year. Okay, so that's another part as well. And then we've got the record keeping element of this. Okay, so you must maintain accurate and complete records for at least 7 years is what we're currently being told. These records provide evidence, obviously, that you're doing your due diligence, your risk management, and your compliance with the law. And obviously the records must include things like your AML CTF program, your customer due diligence. Okay, and we'll go into specifics. Well, we're waiting on specifics on how much of the ID documents and things like that would need to be stored and kept. Transaction records, so records of the transactions, essentially the suspicious transactions. Staff training. So staff training is something that's going to be something that's needed to be tracked, and is there going to be staff training? And then obviously the AML audit results as well. So these are the sort of the 5 steps or the 5 parts of the legislation that is obviously most important or applies most to accountants. I'll try and touch on some of the questions here, because obviously we've got the next bit that I'll touch on. Someone saying everyone's captured. It only applies to those clients caught up in corporate structures. Probably would wait for clarification on that. How do we identify suspicious activity? It's a good question. I sort of have given a few examples in the slide, but again, it's something that AUSTRAC will provide more guidance on because there will be a bit of a framework and sort of some trigger points around with whether or not something is deemed to be suspicious. But yeah, certainly if someone is claiming to be someone that they aren't, that's suspicious. And obviously, if you think that the money is being used for criminal activity or is the proceeds of criminal activity, that's sort of some of the ones that get flagged straight away. Yeah, someone just saying if we provide services to lodge ASIC forms and things like that. Again, does come down to interpretation and does come down to clarification. On reading of the guidance that's currently out, then yeah, because it would be, I would say yes, because they would be involved in the appointment of company directors and the establishments of companies. So it's obviously it's open to interpretation and open to guidance, but yeah, from my reading, that would be the case, yes. Please provide what AML stands for. Anti-money laundering is what AML stands for. Again, how often does ongoing monitoring need to be triggered? That's something that we are waiting clarification on. Lots of questions coming through. Yeah, I'm not going to clarify the international transfers. I'll leave that up to AUSTRAC to clarify the guidance on that. It's just these are the things that they're currently listing. Lots of questions, guys. Great to see so much interest. Can you please clarify politically exposed? Actually, I'm going to do that in this slide. Okay, so I'll move on with the slides because there's so many questions I couldn't possibly answer them all right now. It's great to see everyone interested though. So AUSTRAC are still working through and providing specific guidance. So this is something that, as I've said, we've got a little bit of guidance, but we're getting more, okay? And we're going to get more later in 2025. Some of the existing clarifications or some of the clarifications that they have put out so far, and I actually have linked this at the back of the slides so you can actually view and read the documents if you like as well. But effectively, all directors, beneficial owners, trustees, and beneficiaries are potentially captured. Okay, so that is one of their clarifications. Certain beneficial owners are exempt. Okay, now these certain beneficial owners, it is quite specific, it is quite limited. It's effectively where the government is a beneficial owner. Okay, so that's one of the clarifications. One of the other clarifications is that the compliance officer must be at a management level within the firm. Okay, they're not able to be, well, they just say a management level and they expect it to be a senior person, I guess, is what they're sort of going from here. But again, we wait for a bit more clarification, but that's one of the clarifications they released a few weeks ago. There's lots of questions. When does this become law? I have touched on it, but it's proposed for 1st of July 2026. So what I'm going to talk about now is how BGLiD, which has been around for a while now, we've had BGLiD out for almost 18 months, how that can be help to resolve or help you comply with these new requirements. So first of all, you all have BGLiD in your current BGL applications. BGLiD is live and is able to be used. And if you wanted to check how any of these verifications work, you could run an ID verification on yourself today. So BGLiD is a client identity verification and PEP and sanctions screening service. We've built this in our PEP and sanctions product all along. It's designed specifically for accounting firms. Okay, so it's designed specifically for accounting firms and it appears in all of your BGL applications, CAS 360, Simple Fund 360, and Simple Invest 360. All BGLiD data is linked to the contact in the BGL application. So if you have a director of a company, for example, and you run BGLiD screening on them, that ID screening is linked to their contact record. There's no extensive setup or new application training. It's actually built into your applications, and you just need to use a credit card or an existing credit account to start using it. So I'll talk a little bit about how BGLiD helps with meeting those requirements because that's what we've built it for. So BGLiD firstly will verify the identity documents of your clients. So what we do here is we actually verify the documents with the issuer. Now, this is a really important part, especially when you're going through any ID verification. You want to know what the verification source is. The Australian government is our verification source. So if someone has a passport, we are verifying that against records from the Department of Foreign Affairs. And this is issued or registered passports. So this is obviously the Australian issued passports. They will all comply. But anyone that has essentially registered their foreign passports with the Australian government will also be able to be verified. Okay, so if their passport is registered, it will be able to be verified even if it isn't an Australian passport. We also have driver's license verification, which verifies with all of the state road authorities, and also Medicare verification. The reason why we've put number of sources in here is you want a photographic source first and foremost, and then you may want a second source to verify, and that again makes it a little bit harder to beat the ID verification with a dodgy ID if you've only got one of them. All BGLiD checks also include AML screening, which includes PEP, global sanctions, and watch list screening. So every time you do a BGLiD screening, you automatically get the AML screening. Every single check has AML screening. And then we have excuse me, an extra one called adverse media screening. So you can actually complete some media screening if you wanted to check if that person has had any adverse media. We do this through our integration partner, Frankie One. So they're an Australian business as well. You receive an instant result. So there's no waiting around and things like that. You receive an instant result with a client identity verification report. So a full report showing the whole client identity verification, including what document they used and its expiry date. There are two methods of how BGLiD works. Step one is to go through the process of requesting an ID verification. And this is where we send an email. So send an email out to the client requesting their ID verification, and they can go through the workflow themselves so that you never touch the ID, and they can complete that ID verification. We also have a second one called Verify ID, and this is where you actually already have the ID information. So say, for example, a client has sent you their passport or sent you their driver's license. You are able to key in that data and just click verify, and you'll get a verification result to see that the ID document is a legitimate document. So obviously today there's some TPB rules around IDing new clients, and you should be IDing new clients. These methods obviously make it a much more formal process. It's important in both of these models. What is important in both of these models is consent. You are not allowed to run an ID verification on someone that has not given you permission to do so. Okay, so you can't just start running off ID verifications. You do need consent. Obviously, if you use the request ID verification workflow, there is a consent that the customer ticks themselves. Okay, so they obviously consent when they submit the ID verification. Lots of questions coming through. I will try to get to them all, guys. BGLiD does not store the identity data in BGL products, so we don't save the passport or the driver's license. We don't save that in the product. Obviously, if AUSTRAC come out and say that we have to, we will, but that's not currently the case. Once the ID information is verified, so either positive or not, BGL products will keep that verification result. So you've always got that verification document, and you'll be able to see that verification result, the ID document type that was used to verify as well. So you'll be able to see Warren Rendon used driver's license, and his driver's license expires this date, and it was a Victorian driver's license. So you get that information, but you don't get the actual license numbers and the particulars. You just get a little bit of information. Passport is similar. You'll get the country of the passport and its expiry date. For PEP, AML, and news information, we will show this to you, all this information to you, because it's public record. A lot of the times, if someone does come up on a PEP screening, it will have a link to that article. Unfortunately, sometimes with AML and PEP screening, there is this whole notion of false positives. Certainly, if you've got someone with a very common name, someone like poor John Smith, John Smith would come up with a lot of AML and PEP results, most of them, or just about all of them, won't be related to the John Smith that's your client. It's just that someone else named John Smith might have done something else. We've added a lot of features and functionality to BGLiD over the journey. One of the best features we've got is automatic retry. A lot of the time, well, not a lot of the time, I shouldn't say that. Sometimes clients make mistakes when keying in their ID details. And if they do, BGLiD actually has an automatic free retry. So we give you 2 attempts. We don't charge you for each attempt. Obviously, Australian Medicare verification and 2 source document verification is really important as well. So you can verify across 2 source documents. Again, just adding a little bit more quality and a little bit more detail to the ID verification check. We also do New Zealand driver's licenses. And then we have a lot of the automation that's built into other BGL products. So automatic email reminders. So if you send a verification out to a client, and they haven't completed it, there's automatic reminders that are sent to them to remind them to complete it. And also there's an email confirmation on completion. Full customizable email templates, as well as BGLiD outbox and BGLiD reports, and biometric scanning, which I'll touch on in a second. We also released BGLiD in Simple Fund and Simple Invest earlier this year. You may have seen that you've got some verified and non-verified contacts in BGL, in Simple Fund and Simple Invest. What I'll do is I'll touch on what biometric scanning is, and then I'll show you a demo of how biometric scanning works. So biometric scanning is seen as the highest level of ID verification. So you can go through the process of just ID verifying or verifying the ID documents, and then you can go even further and require the client to complete a biometric scan. So what this does is it goes through the same level 1 where we use a government ID document and we verify that that document is a legitimate document. So let's take, for example, a passport. We will get the passport and we'll verify that the passport is a legitimately issued passport. And then using that image on the passport, we will then ask the client to essentially take a selfie, and we will cross-check the image on the passport with their selfie to verify that there's a match between the 2 images. So this is then a second level of verification. There's actually 24 data points that are used as part of that biometric verification. So there's the biometric verification will obviously make sure that the images match, and there's, as I said, 24 data points of those matching, and then it will effectively verify that the image is a match and that the document is a legitimate document. So there's the 2 levels of verification, and then we provide the AML screening on top of that. So biometric scanning is obviously the most detailed and of the checks. So just with BGLiD, just to clarify, there's no lock-in contracts. It's simple, easy access to identity verification within your existing software products. You pay as you go. It's made by BGL, and it's supported by the BGL support team in Melbourne. So let's have a look. I know there's a lot of questions. I'll get to the questions. Let's have a look at how BGLiD works in action. So what we're doing here is just inside CAS 360 is we're sending off a request. So just by using the request ID verification, and we can select the type of requests that we are using. So we'll go down to biometric here, and we'll click proceed. Here, what we've got is our email that's going out to our client. So this is just an email that you've got full control over, and we can send this out to the client. And that's it. That's how easy it is from your side of the system to send out that request. Go to the contact. If the contact's not there, you can add them. We just need a name and email address, name, address, and email address. And then you can send out this request ID verification. And now we're in your client's shoes. This is what your client will go through. They get their email and they click on verify identity. They proceed through with their 2-factor code because everyone needs more 2-factor codes. And what we can do here is go through and use our QR code on our phone to scan. And this is what's obviously used as part of the upload of the ID documents and the selfie components. So this is all now just being set up. Obviously, there's a consent. Select the ID document of choice. Okay, so open up the camera. And what we are effectively doing here is going to take an image of the front and the back of the driver's license. So there's obviously the front, there's a bit of an inspection that goes on, and then obviously it proceeds. You asked for the back of the ID. So that will then be scanned. Right. And then it will obviously proceed to the selfie component. So we validate the documents and then proceed to the selfie. There's Doobie, our head of development. And the selfie is then uploaded. There's a bit of work that goes on in the background, and the verification is now complete. That verification is complete. The client has completed their steps, and then we go back into CAS 360. We'll obviously receive a real-time notification. Obviously, when you're using dummy IDs, the verifications fail. But go into the verification, and we can see that particular contact record and their verification details and their verification result. Hopefully, that makes sense to everyone. I'll talk a little bit about pricing, and then I'll get to the 48 unanswered questions. BGLiD pricing. So we obviously do a government ID check, 1 or 2 sources for $7. That includes AML and global sanctions and PEP. Okay, it doesn't include adverse news. We do an Australian government ID plus adverse news. So that's $9. It includes the government IDs 1 or 2. AML, sanctions, and media. And then we have the biometric, which is $10. Government ID database, anti-money laundering database, global sanctions database, and biometric scanning. All right, let's get to these questions. Only 52. All right. I'll try and answer as many as I can, guys. I appreciate there's a lot of interest in this. So this question here, CDD processors will apply for new services from 1 July, also being applied for current services. So as I said, the current view, and this is on the AUSTRAC website now, is that the pre-commencement customers won't require the, I suppose, initial CDD process. So if they are an existing customer, the initial CDD, so the first step of CDD won't be required. But again, we're still a few months out before this takes live, so it's always important that we make sure that we are checking. Question there about PEP, but I won't get onto that. How often do you need to check the IDs under these rules? As I said, we're sort of waiting for guidance ongoing. So effectively, this is where we're waiting for that guidance for existing customers, and if we need to verify or do any checking beyond their initial phase. So maybe if there's been new ID documents or a change to ID. So we are still waiting a little bit on that. And also if we onboard a new customer, how often we need to check again, we are waiting on guidance for that. How often does ongoing monitoring? Again, we've sort of touched on that. Is it fine to keep customer DD docs for 7 years if they're no longer acting as a director or a client? Again, I'd love to answer that for you. It's just we're waiting on the specifics. So there's a bit of a crossover here. Potentially AUSTRAC will require that accountants keep the ID documents, whereas the TPB have been very strong on not keeping ID documents. So that's sort of the two situations we find ourselves. Hopefully, we get some clarification, and I suspect AUSTRAC would prefer that the data is kept, but we'll wait and see. On what level do we monitor suspicious activity? As I said previously, there's a couple of trigger points there around what should be monitored around criminal proceeds and if there's criminal activity taking place, or if someone is pretending to be someone that they are not. So there's sort of the 3 triggers, but again, we hopefully get a little bit more detail. Regular medium-sized business affected by the new changes if they have an accountant or registered lawyers, directors and company secretary, or are these changes only for accounting firms and law firms? Yeah, it's a great question, but at this stage, the business is not affected by this. depending on what the business activity does. For example, a real estate business would be. But in general, the majority of businesses aren't affected. They need to be part of that captured list. But the changes, accounting firms and law firms are part of the captured list. Okay, so hopefully that answers the question. Does this apply to SMSF trustees? Look, broadly no, but it does depend on what the SMSF trustee is doing. But if you are an SMSF trustee that's just looking after your own fund, then by my current reading, no, it doesn't apply to you. What was the point of director ID? Good question. I'm not the person to answer that. So what if they are PEP? Now here, this is the interesting question. So if they are PEP, there will be, I suppose, more guidance on what needs to be done. It's more likely that they'll just need a, it would need to be flagged that they are PEP. A politically exposed person, and they would have what's called a higher risk profile. And what that high risk profile sort of means in practical terms, we're waiting on details for. But effectively in other regions where there's similar legislation, it just means it might be an annual check as opposed to a 3-year check. Do you think Austrac will release info sheets so we can communicate this with clients? Yes, that is certainly their intention. Can you create an integration with XPM? Liliana, I'm more than happy for you to ask this because I have asked this as well. Yes, we would love to have an integration with XPM to send them our BGLiD verification results. It would be great, as it would be with other practice apps as well. And certainly that's our plan. Yep. You mentioned on the initial page that accountants would be captured. However, the Interact tool on Azure does not state accountants are included, only on the service. Yeah, you're correct. So accountants in general, as I sort of said, accountants are listed on the Austrac website. That's very clear. But it does depend on the services that the accountants are providing. So if the accountants are not providing the services that are specified, then they would not be captured. Okay, so accountants are listed, but only accountants that are providing the captured services. Okay, now there might be more clarification on the captured services, but effectively it does revolve around appointment of directors, setting up companies and trusts, appointment of shareholders, and registered office services. So they're the 4 main ones. If your firm is not doing any of that work, then potentially you may not be captured. So hopefully that answers the question. But it does, obviously it does depend on the services that the accountants are providing. It's not a capture all for accountants. The accountants must be providing one of the captured services. ID does not work for non-residents. It depends on what ID they have. It's very hard to get government ID verification around the world. In fact, Australia and New Zealand are leading the world in allowing this sort of verification. So whilst over time we will add more and more ID verification, and I suppose government verification for non-residents, it may go back to a much more simpler model where it's just a collection of the ID, right? But again, we might get a bit more guidance on that. I'm losing my voice here. With BGLiD, can we use it for all new practice clients? Yes. Yes, it's all BGLiD has been built to be used across your practice for all clients, even if you're just doing tax returns and things like that. If they are not a director or a shareholder of a company, you can just go to the contact screen of CAS 360, add them in, and complete a BGLiD verification. So the question here again is, can you use BGLiD for non-BGL clients? The answer is yes. Go to your CAS 360 screen, add them to the contacts list. There's no charge for adding someone to a contacts list. It doesn't take up a company slot on your subscription, and you can go through the process of completing a ID verification. I've got a 3rd copy of the same question, but yes, just add them to the contacts list. Do you need to verify the individual if you only onboard the entity and not the individual themselves? It's a great question. Generally, you will need to verify the identity of the individuals involved in the entity. Okay, but again, we will wait we'll wait for more and more details on that. But yes, more generally, if there is a company that you are onboarding and that company has three directors, you would need to check the identity of the three directors. So these rules apply to new clients that start from or after 1 July. Do you need to BGLiD all existing clients? So the BGLiD will help manage, obviously, ID verification of your clients. These new laws obviously apply from 1 July 2026. There is obviously TPB requirements for you to ID verify now as well, so maybe check on those. Yeah, if clients have done director IDs, why are they making us do a lot of it? Look, the reality with director ID is that the director ID verification isn't, well, even the numbers private, right? There's no central database where you can even check the ID numbers of these people. So the director ID data is sort of behind a government wall at the moment. It's not public data. Is a PEP and sanctions fail automatically a bad thing? As I said, it's not always a bad thing, a PEP and sanctions fail, purely because of the potential for a false positive. Okay, so when you do a PEP and sanctions fail, there's a likely false positive, especially if the person has a common name. When a PEP and sanctions does fail, you need to review it. Okay, and this will be part of the sort of the AML policy is if a PEP and sanctions fail comes through, you're required to review it. And CAS 360 has all this workflow where you can manually review the PEP and sanction and you can manually pass and manually fail, right? The potential PEP and sanction. So if someone is politically exposed and that is legitimately them, then yes, that may require higher due diligence or higher checking. If someone is under a sanction, then yeah, you'll need to check what the sanction is. Oop. Not sure what's happened there. Okay, I'll just go back to my slideshow. Check here. Do you have to request originals? Look, when it comes to BGLiD and using the request ID verification workflow, what we've been really clear on is trying to, where possible, not have the accountant touch the ID documents so that the client is really only providing them to a website and getting them verified as opposed to, forwarding them through an email to the accountant and things like that. Do you have a template that we can use to email a client for them to consent to us to running ID verifications? Not so much, Jessica. The request ID verification workflow does have that built in, so it's a tick. So yeah, we do have that. We don't have an email that requests verificate or gives consent, I guess. Maybe we can add that. Don't the TPP and ATO requirements state you need to cite documents? Yeah, if you're not citing them, yeah. So again, with citing and things like verifying, yeah, you can use essentially you're needing to verify the person is who they say they are. What is the liability for accountants that follow the rules but a client breaks the law? Yeah, very broad question. Probably not best that I answer it, but generally, if yeah, I'll say generally, if you're following all the rules, you're doing everything right. You, I don't want to say anything that'll get me in trouble, but generally, you're not responsible for the actions of your client. You're responsible for your actions. So if you know that the client is breaking the law, what actions have you taken? And that may be as simple as reporting an SMR. Yes, we have BGLiD does have open APIs, and we are looking to integrate with accounting practice management software. So yes. Again, if we are an accounting firm that provides tax compliance, do we have to register with AUSTRAC? Again, it comes down to those services, okay? Those services that you are offering, okay? So yes. Here we go. What is the workaround if people refuse to have their image uploaded to the internet for bias scanning? And this is it's a great question. This is where the need is to verify that the person is who they say they are. So sometimes clients will say, "Oh, look, we don't want to do this. You've got to find a way of ensuring they are who they say they are. Um, so that's sort of more generally, this is BGLiD is one method of verifying they are who they say they are. TVB ID requirements for us to ID and compare the client to ensure a match. This can be done either in person or over a video. Yeah, so in terms of the TPB requirement, obviously biometric scanning is effectively doing this. And I'm happy to get into a debate with the TPB whether or not an accountant over Zoom looking at a client's ID up on a screen uh, versus a full government data match and biometric scan, which one's more complete and which one's more reliable. Certainly the biometric scanning is much, 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 much more reliable. Currently, we're not required to identify all office holders and shareholders. That's correct, currently, but make sure we check the laws after 1 July. Can BGLiD do verification of foreigners with foreign passports only? Okay, so this is, yeah, this is where it gets to, yeah, I'll talk about the councillors, yeah. This is where it gets to the verification of foreigners. It depends on where their ID is registered. Okay. Yeah, so I got the comment from the second exposure draft as well. Interesting around the mayors and local councillors. I thought that the clarification said that it's state and territory government, right? So I will go back and verify that. Maybe I got that wrong. Couple of questions. What if a client doesn't have an email? Then we can't send them an email. How can client access via a web browser? I mean, they need to use the web browser to click on that ID. How does taking a photo work with a digital license? A good question. I don't know. As VGL is a service provider, do you need to undertake your own identity checks on your customers? We actually have got integrated BGLiD into customer checks. Other than driver's license or passport, what other photo ID can be used? They're the two at the moment. Is there a way to export the results so we can keep record? Yes, it's part of our export to PDF. Do we know how frequently you'll be required to do risk assessments for clients? Again, we're waiting on guidance there. Can you please go back to the price guide? The prices are on the website, but there's the price slide there. Is there a requirement for foreign directors? Does this service cover countries like the Netherlands? Again, yes, it does. It just depends where their ID is verified. Different question. Is your database integrated with AUSTRAC? No, it's not. Does BGLiD meet TVB? Yes. Are BGL planning to implement complete software package? Yes, we are. That's BGLiD is going to do that. Oof, a lot of 100 questions. All right. Can we access BGLiD from micro businesses that not manage ASIC? Yes, you can add them to the contacts list. Does legislation allow for expense recovery? I think that's a different point. It's not related to that. How do we assess which test we need to do? I guess it'd be a little bit more related to the rules. ID existing clients existing tanks look like they're exempt. Will the information be automatically input in CAS details? Yes. Yeah, we will add a product for biometric and adverse news. Yes, we will. Is the new clients coming on board? Yeah, a lot of repeat questions here. The captured services are listed at the start. Are the clients, directors getting AML audited or just the accounting firm? It's the accounting firm. If we check the client, we engage, but then become criminal after the fact. The onus on us to do ongoing checks. I said essentially there's a framework there that needs to be followed. What the client does, you're not all that responsible for, but if there's clear suspicious activity, you need to lodge. Who will need to register? The accounting firm. Yes, the accounting firm will need to register and they have to provide key information. So if you don't provide a capture service to a specific client, do you need to still identify that client? Well, potentially not under this requirement, okay? There's a lot of questions coming through. We've had trouble with photos being recognized. Any tips? Look, it's hard. I mean, to take better photos, but yeah, look, I mean, maybe ask the client to be careful when they're taking photos. If there are trusts involved, how many beneficiaries need verifying? Again, these sorts of things are probably a little bit more operational, and we'll get a bit more information soon. In the demo, it looked like you opened an ID request on PC and then used QR code. If the client opens email on the phone, is there a different non-QR code option? You do have to use the QR code because that will then take the client to the link. You can actually get an SMS sent that includes the link as well. Once an ID scan is done, does the system flag or advise you of anything? Yes, it does. You will get full detail of the PEP, sanctions, everything like that. Is BGL advocating or lobbying for a delay in this? You can submit requests. I guess when it comes to BGL, we focus on how we can help rather than anything else, I guess. Do you review PEP? Is there some sort of verification process? With the PEP checking, we do check a global PEP database. That's how that works. Do we need to do the IG check again if the director has it done under a different company? Generally, no. If you need to ID the verification or ID the client once, that's it. How do you manually pass a person? I ran an ID check myself, got a false positive PEP. So yeah, go into the contact screen, Jen, and you can flag it as manually passed. Will BGLiD send us a reminder of upcoming expiry of ID docs? That's the plan. Yes, there'll be an alert for that coming soon. Have we got to do verification this way? Yeah, I mean, you need to verify the client is who they say they are. And obviously BGLiD is a way that you can do that. Is there going to be an instructional video that can be sent to clients? Yeah, we could do that. When you say you don't store the ID, does the ID data get deleted once the verification is complete? The answer right now today is yes, it does. We only hold the data for 24 hours before we delete it for verified IDs, or less than 24 hours. If BGLiD is being done by a lawyer, can the accountant use the same verification? Well, technically, they'd have to share the verification result. That could be done. All right. What about our own entities? Can you verify ourselves? Yes, you can. You can do that today through the contact screen in CAS 360. If we're using BGLiD, then we are not required to obtain certified AU passport or driver's license and can rely on the BGL verification. Yeah, that's the point. The BGLiD will verify that the ID documents that they're using are correct. Is BGLiD a separate standalone software program? Look, we have plans to do that. Currently, you have to get CAS 360 or one of the other products. Couple of questions. Client refuses to be ID. Does that mean we have to essentially reject them as a client? Look, I mean, it's a decision for the firm, but you need to verify somehow that they are who they say they are. That's what the legislation is. Some firms will say no as a client. Some it depends. It depends completely up to the client. Does this process need to be done for those that are not actively a client? It depends on the services that you're offering. Okay, so if they're not part of those services, then potentially no. If we're the registered office of a company on 30th of 6, is it correct to say that there's no requirement? If we're yeah, Julian, I think so, but let's just wait for some verification. If a client doesn't have a photo ID, can they still be verified? It's almost impossible, but you need to be satisfied that they are who they say they are. What do you mean by where an ID is verified? What if it is a foreign ID and doesn't support the system? And then, look, obviously, foreign IDs are obviously a challenge. Yeah. Is BGL accredited to perform these checks? And what is the information stored? So we actually, as I said before, we use a partner called Frankie One, and they essentially the body we're using to do the checks, and they're all accredited. So yes. Where is the information stored? Depends which ID verification they use. If it's just a Gov ID, it's stored in Australia. If they use the biometric, there's obviously uses the biometric service, which expands on that. So yeah, there's more details there that we can provide. Just want to clarify in terms of obligations, we can use BGLiD optionally screen pre-commencement. That's correct. You can use BGLiD today. If we use the first option, OzGov ID check for $7, that's sufficient to, yes, it is. Well, it depends. If the TPB want you to cite it, then biometric is probably the best way to go. If CAS 360 are lodging with ASIC all these corporate changes, what obligation does CAS 360 have with regards to these lodgements? CAS 360 is the tool. It's still driven by people, I guess. But if they were to be requirements on the software, then we would have to comply with those. How do you use this through BGL? I don't have any BGL software. Yeah, you would obviously need to buy a BGL product like CAS 360 to be able to do BGL ID. How can BGLiD check foreign-based shareholders? And again, this is the foreign question has come up a lot of times. It's very difficult because it's country per country. But if their passport is registered in Australia, then we will be able to verify. When the license or passports expires, what we need to do? Again, we're waiting on guidance for this. Different countries have different countries have different rules. Is there a way to transfer costs to the client? Yeah, I mean, I guess this is up to the practice, whether if they want to charge an onboarding fee or something like that. BGL does store our data in Australia, yes. Thank you for coming along, David. If the client shows their driver's license in person, do we still need to verify it? I mean, again, you need to be confident that the person is who they say they are, right? So ID verification through BGLiD is one way of doing that. Although you won't be able to do any PEP and sanction screening, you will need BGLiD. If we are taking on a client who refuses to be verified, yeah, again, it's a question for the firm whether or not they believe they can satisfy the requirement of knowing who the client is. There we go. All 112 questions answered. Thank you guys for your interest. And hopefully this session's been useful for you all. If you do have any other questions, I've got my email that I'll put up on the screen now. If you do have any other questions, please feel free to send me an email. I'm happy to help. And we have got some resources up in the slides as well, where you can have a bit of a look at those as well, based on the AUSTRAC website. But that is it for the webinar today. Thank you all for coming along today. I hope you enjoyed the session, and have a fantastic rest of your Thursday. Thanks a lot, and bye for now.